my name is Salah, and this is my Unbroken vlog. This book is called Unbroken. It is about a war veteran that went through a lot of challenges. Unbroken was written by Lauren Hillebrand and was published in the year 2010, November 16. Let me start by introducing Louis Zamperini. Louis was born an Italian immigrant on January 26, 1917, in the town Torrance, California. Louis at a young age was known as a juvenile delinquent. He was a troublemaker that started smoking at the age of 5 and drinker by 8. Louis was known around town as the kid that stole, beat kids, and dared to challenge him and deflated teacher car tires, until his older brother Pete pushed Louis to join the track team to get out of juvenile detention. Louis' life changed. Louis became one of California's top athletes and achieved a national high school record. After running a mile in 4 minutes and 21 seconds, Louis' Olympic days were over. He joined the Army Air Corps and became a bombardier in World War II. Louis served as a B-24 Liberator in the Army Air Corps 372nd Bomb Squadron. He flew several missions, but the one that changed his course of life was when Louis and his crew were on a rescue mission over the Pacific when their plane suddenly lost power and crashed into the sea. Only 3 out of the 11 crewmen survived, which were Louis, the pilot Phil, and the tail gunner Francis. They spent 47 days lost at sea with just the raft dying of hunger, dehydration, and packs of sharks circling them. And after 33 days, Francis passed away. Louis and Phil remained at sea until they were captured by the Japanese Navy near Marshall Islands. After being captured at Kwajalein, Louis was shipped to the Japanese mainland, being interrogated by 3 different centers at PW camps. Over the next 2 years, Louis suffered from diseases, exposure, and starvation, and daily beatings by guards. Louis then was sent to Omori, that was known as a POW camp that treat prisoners of war with decent respect, but turned out to be where someone named Mutashiro Watanabe, nicknamed the Bird, was stationed. The Bird was someone that had it in for Louis. He would beat Louis with clubs, belts, and fists, and regularly threatened to kill him. The Japanese used Louis as a propaganda scheme and made it look like the United States lied about Louis not being dead. They used him as a tool to lower American morale and published a letter that Louis wrote to his parents. That gave a little hope to his mom, who believed Louis was alive in the first place. Finally, liberated in 1945, Louis returned back home, where he gets married to Cynthia Applewhite, who was several years younger than him. They met at Miami Beach. She was a beautiful girl and caught Louis' heart. But Louis was still having PTSD from the war and couldn't cope with everything like a normal person would. Even though Louis loved Cynthia, he still was having nightmares from the Bird and was drinking just to forget about the torture he'd been through. After having even more nightmares, Louis was thinking about going to the Bird and kill him just so he could stop the dreams he had. Mutashiro Watanabe ran away and went into hiding, and was number 23 on the list of 40 wanted men, and was never prosecuted for his crimes. Later on, Louis heard the news that the Bird died, but that was not certain. In 1994, Louis became a Christian through the ministry of Reverend Billy Graham and began a full recovery from his emotional wounds, which included finding the strength to forgive all his captors. Louis spent the rest of his life leading an organization for Risk Boys and also worked as an inspirational speaker. Now for my theme, I think there's 3 major ideas on several occasions. The author explains the key to survival through such difficult times. One being the preservation of human dignity. The author talks about how Louis' story had Louis and Phil maintained their humanity and dignity despite horrific, inhumane treatment. They were one of those ones that had a stronger chance of survival. Next being faith, shows experience in 2 ways. Faith and redemption. First, when he was a troubled teen, Louis' life took a significant and positive turn when his brother Pete believed that he could make something of himself. Of course, Louis had to accept this belief as himself as well, otherwise he would have depended on Pete to help to guide him. So now I'm going to get into my 3 minutes of dramatic reading. Sharks and bullets. On the morning of the 27th day, a plane came. It began with a rumble of engines and then a spot in the sky. It was a twin-engine bomber, moving west at a brisk clip. It was so far away that expending the flares and dye was questionable. The men conferred and voted. They decided to take a shot. Louis fired one flare, reloaded, then fired a second. Drawing a vivid line across the sky, he opened a dye container and spilled its contents into the ocean. Then dug out the mirror and angled a square of light toward the bomber. The men waiting, hoping. The plane grew smaller, then faded away. As the castaways slumped in the rafts, trying to accept another lost chance, over the western horizon there was a glimmer. Tracing a wide curve, then banking toward the rafts, the bomber was coming back. Weeping with joy, Louis, Phil, and Mac tugged their shirts over their heads and snapped them back and forth in the air. Calling out, the bomber leveled off, skimming over the water. Louis squinted at the cockpit. He made out two silhouettes, a pilot and co-pilot. He thought of Palmyra, food, solid ground underfoot. And then all at once the ocean erupted. There was a deafening noise, and the raft began hopping and shuddering under the castaways. The gunners were firing at them. Louis, Phil, and Mac clawed the raft's walls and threw themselves overboard. They swam under the rafts and huddled there, watching the bullets tear through the rafts and cut bright slits into the water around them. Then firing stopped. The men surfaced. The bomber had overshot then and was now to the east, moving away. Two sharks were nosing around. The men had to get out of the water immediately. Clinging to the side of Louis and Mac's raft, Phil was completely done in. The leap into the water had taken everything that was left in him. He floundered, unable to pull himself over the raft wall. Louis swam behind him and gave him a push, and Phil sloped up on board. Mac, too, needed Louis' help to climb over the wall. Louis then dragged himself, and the three sat there, stunned but uninjured. They couldn't believe that the airmen, mistaking them for Japanese, would starve unarmed castaways. Under them, the raft felt doughy, and it was leaking air. In the distance, the bomber swung around, began flying at the raft again. Louis hoped that the crew realized the mistake.